Welcome back here to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to discuss another running back, or the first running back, I should say, on today's show at least. Josh Jacobs, now a Green Bay Packer. Very good move for the Packers to make, especially if Aaron Jones wasn't going to work in renegotiating his contract and keeping him in Green Bay. You have a very capable replacement and arguably a better running back for some people in Josh Jacobs. You did sign him to about $12 million to a $12 million salary. So how that plays out throughout the entirety of those 4 years will be something to monitor. But why and how did this all happen? I touched on it before on the differences that Josh Jacobs has already noticed by being on the Packers compared to Las Vegas. But talking about why he actually left, what made it about the Las Vegas Raiders and where they were heading, what did he see over there that really was the final straw to make this decision and move on in free agency. He talked about it on the Green Light podcast with Chris Long, and he brought up he didn't really hold back at all, which surprised me a little bit with how hard he went at his former team by saying the following. I have it up here to show you guys. This is the first thing he said, talking about, being drafted by the Raiders. He said, "Coming from Alabama, I went to a championship every year. I was there. I remember coming to the league and losing my first game, and I was mad and not talking to nobody. A vet came up to me and was like, 'This is the NFL. You're going to lose.' I'm like, 'So y'all cool with losing?' It was so different." And from that standpoint, it's hard to argue with him. It's hard to bring that up, or actually not just bring it up, but also just see from that point. And it is a reality, really talking generally about what that statement was said with that veteran player. With him saying that at that point in time to Josh Jacobs, I'm sure it was a surprise to him, but at the same time, the Raiders were in a weird spot. Josh Jacobs was really that first building block, that first piece to this big puzzle that the Raiders had envisioned when they drafted him back in 2019. He was supposed to be that first piece to this offense, building everything around him. Then you find a quarterback, you find a receiver, you start building it up through there. But on that point, it is a hard transition to not defend Josh Jacobs on, because a lot of Alabama players come from unrealistic success at Alabama, especially during his time there with Nick Saban. Nobody could touch them. They were the best of college football. He had the dynasty of dynasties over there, Nick Saban, with that team, and all the talent that he poured into the NFL year in, year out, with all of his players and how ready he got them to play. But a lot of them probably went to bad teams. A lot of them probably went to bad situations for how early they were drafted. And Josh Jacobs at that time was drafted to the Raiders, and they were 7-9 in his rookie year. Then they were 8-8 in 2020, and they didn't have their first winning season with Josh Jacobs until 2021, where it was his first winning season in his third year. So you can imagine having to wait that long and only be 10-7 and probably not make it too far into the playoffs, if at all, is super frustrating for Josh Jacobs at that point. And coming from where he was coming from, it is a tough pill to swallow. I do acknowledge that, but at the same time, it does come with a grain of salt, just because he is coming into a situation where the NFL is a lot different from college. You're not going to be blowing teams out by 20, 30 each game just because you're at Alabama. So I do see both sides of it, but the next quote that Josh Jacobs said really drew me in when he said, "The most frustrating thing about it all, you've got me and Tay and Max. You've got guys who come in every day and work hard, and you don't get the results. You'll be close every year, but not winning. You want me to come back on a discount and lose? I don't know how I feel about that." And that part is really what sets it apart from everything, just because it makes sense. It makes sense from that standpoint, because Josh Jacobs, you can accept losing. You can accept losing, and you can accept being one of the first pieces to this entire thing, and knowing that It's not going to look great right now. Heck, it might even look awful, terrible right now with how we're performing out there on the field. But when we start getting into these contract negotiations, once we start talking about how you value me, if I'm going to accept that role of being the first piece to this big plan you guys have in mind, could I at least get a little bit extra in that contract? Could I at least get some more value from you guys on how you guys see me in terms of value in this offense, in this organization? If we're going to be okay with losing, if we're going to accept it just for now and expect bigger things later on, should I or will I get paid accordingly to how much, I've put into this organization by building it up or helping you guys build it up from the ground zero all the way to where it is right now? Similarly with Saquon, because Saquon was really that next piece to lead the Giants into this new era. Obviously, it didn't work out like that, but he, in my opinion, should have been paid according to how much work he put in to really keep the Giants relevant, for how much he did for that organization to keep them competitive at least and have something that opposing defenses have to worry about. Josh Jacobs, not to the level of Saquon, because Saquon obviously produced at a higher rate than him earlier on, but Josh Jacobs had that one great year with the Raiders where he was near the top in a lot of categories as a running back, but he also dealt with injuries, so there is that pushback from the Raiders in that aspect. But overall, I think having a guy like Josh Jacobs on their team, and just alluding to the fact that they offered him less than what he was expecting when he said, you want me to come back on a discount and lose, that part is where you start to see the disconnect with running backs. Like I said before, teams like to categorize all these running backs as they all are the same running back. And once they hit 27, all these running backs are going to be bad. They're all going to start producing 800, 700-yard seasons. And I'm not saying that Josh Jacobs was going to continue to put up 1,000-yard seasons like it was nothing, but I think you do have to give him a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt and offer him maybe close to 10, 9 maybe, to at least get him to think about it. It looks the way he was talking that they weren't really close to anywhere close to where he was thinking of where his value stood, and it seemed like he took it as a pretty easy choice to make at the end of the day in free agency, to move on, see what his market is out there, and the Packers didn't hesitate. There is a lot of salary cap gymnastics going on with this new contract that he has with the Green Bay Packers, but you do see that salary, you do see the guaranteed money coming in from the Packers, at least in that first year. It's definitely enough to move him over to Green Bay, and now you're left with Josh Jacobs and the Raiders splitting up in a very surprising way. But the question is now, it looks bad the way Josh Jacobs is describing it, with the Raiders not valuing him as highly as he would have thought. But I asked myself, was it actually that bad at the end of the day for both parties? Because in Las Vegas's defense, it was a tough time for them as an organization. Josh Jacobs was really going to be that first piece to everything, but you're entering now into a period with Antonio Pierce as your head coach, and say you would have paid Josh Jacobs all that money to keep him there, would you have really been able to make that big of an impact at least this year and make this team a 10-win, 11-win team to really validate that contract? Now, moving on from Josh Jacobs, you can start thinking to the future, and you have Zamir White, who at least showed you something last year. You have Amir Abdullah. You also have Alexander Madison you brought in as well. All those guys in a running back for committee for the Las Vegas Raiders. It might not be as eye-popping as other rooms, as other situations are, but you start playing towards the future now, and you have that extra cap space to work in there. And at the end of the day, with that extra cap space, you could look to free agency next year and start looking at some more expensive quarterbacks, which is really the biggest thing that has been missing. I've been watching the Receiver series on Netflix, only 3 episodes in actually, and you could see and sense the frustration from Devontae Adams through the screen, I swear. from Brian Hoyer, Jimmy Garoppolo, and the quarterback situation that he's had to deal with. You could see the frustration clear as day. He talks about it clear as day on that series. I recommend you guys going and checking that out. But that seems to be the main issue. And if you have to sacrifice Josh Jacobs at the end of the day and he goes on to a better situation in his eyes, I don't really see that big of a loser. It sounds crazy from the way he was talking about it, almost blasting the Raiders, but I think it almost in a way makes it better for everybody, for Josh Jacobs to move on to a better situation and the Raiders to maybe take another hit this year, but they have a really good chance next year of getting maybe Dak if he becomes available, maybe Tua. You never know in free agency, so overall, you take this one step back, but you could take 2 steps forward next year and really become a better team under Antonio Pierce heading into 2024 and then really in 2025 if this all works well. So not all negative. The way he was talking about it might seem like that, but this could be secretly a very beneficial thing for everybody if it all works out the way I'm planning it out. Obviously, it all has to happen like this, but you can start planning like this now with extra salary cap space. So that's that situation. Josh Jacobs not holding back, but the Raiders, I secretly think, are building something there. So I'm holding off until next year to see what they really do in free agency. But we have one more thing to talk about, one more running back to get to, Rachaad White. He has some pretty lofty goals in 2024. What are those goals, and can they lead to a back-to-back NFC South title in 2024? I'll give my thoughts on it when we return in just a few seconds.